Hi Matt, how you doing?
Hello, good, thanks. How's it
Hi.
going?
Yeah, good, thank you. Good to speak to you. Thanks for taking the time as well to have a quick chat with us about the book. Really, just sort of finished reading it today, so I'm quite excited to chat about it.
Brilliant.
So, could you tell us a little bit about how it all came sort of together, and your background as well in film?
Okay, yeah. How long have you got? I'm,
The
I'm
short, the short version.
the short version. Okay, the elevator pitch is I'm a film critic for magazines like Total Film and Radio Times and GQ and places like that. And I've moved into writing books about cinema a couple of years ago. And my third book is the Book of Horror, which is an in-depth illustrated guide to the scariest movies ever made. And it just came out on September the 22nd.
Brilliant. And how's the feedback been so far? It looks, from what I've seen online and from the reviews as well, people have really loved the list. It's kind of maybe not what you'd expect from the scariest kind of horror films. There are some unexpected films in there, and of course the classics that you would expect as well.
The feedback has been amazing. I don't know if that's just because it's filtered through, the feedback of your friends and peers. If you're a film critic, it's easy to get other critics to review things, but everyone's been really generous and nothing ever gets a full thumbs up. So I've had lots of lovely compliments. And then equally, I remember one guy saying, wait, this is the book to get if you want to see all the obvious stuff. But I was like, obvious stuff? There's like references to, there's some films in there that I've mentioned to horror film fans that they've never heard of. So I do feel like it ticks the boxes, like we've got The Exorcists and The Shinings and things like that. And I also think there is some deeper dive stuff in there.
Yeah, definitely. There was a couple on the list which I've never seen, Lake Mungo, which I think Gareth was saying to me, "How have you never seen this film?" And I was like, "It's always been on the list." Much like Demons by Argento as well. That's another one which I've caught up on this week.
What a film! What a film! That is,
Incredible, absolutely
that's
incredible.
the worst double bill ever. But those are two of the greatest horror movies.
Yeah,
Complete
but
opposites.
it's
Yeah.
funny how precious people are in the horror community. I think, especially when you bring out a book like this, people are so precious of these films, and how everyone has their own list as well. That they think, oh, why haven't you included that?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I was being unfair. People have been really lovely, and it sets out to say, any list is saying this is the scariest films ever made, according to me. And there are some scientific criteria I've tried to bring in, but it's only ever subjective. There's lots of things that, that if someone writing a different book would have. I don't think it'd be possible to have a completely different list. Like I say, we have some of the classics in there, but we'd have a completely different take on stuff. And some people have flicked through and gone, "This is great, this is great, I love this." But how on earth have you included, X film? Like somebody said, "Why have you included Lake Mungo?" To which I probably spat out whatever I was
Confused.
drinking. Because it's a masterpiece and it's scary and it's clever and it's moving and I could go on.
No, brilliant. So, sort of your relationship with horror then, has that sort of been through your career, or have you always been a fan of horror? Is that a genre that's been really special to you since you were sort of younger?
Yeah, it's the other way around, really. I think I'm into films because I'm into horror, and I got into horror really young. Maybe 9 or 10. I guess lots of people do. You pick up books that are a little bit too adult for you, Stephen King or what have you, and it becomes quite an addiction, I would say. You find that you don't get that kind of buzz from reading and watching other things, even if things themselves aren't very good. And I think, that way there's sort of like a slight addiction. You're looking for the next hit. And I think that way you get a horror fan for life. And I bet that's how most horror fans were born.
Yeah, it's fun. It's funny actually. I've just been speaking today to someone about sort of my growing up and sort of discovering horror films, which was very much the VHS collection that you weren't allowed to touch in the house,
Yeah.
that was tucked away in the cupboard. It was like there was sort of Predator, The Thing, The Fly, all those kind of, all just stuck ready there, sort of waiting for your parents to be out to sort of sneak a watch with your mates or whatever at home. It's kind of that forbidden thing that kind of attracts you in at a young age, I think, like with the whole, video nasty and all that kind of era of films.
Especially when back in the sort of 80s and early 90s, when things were harder to get. So the filters by which you got things, I just set a video for every night for whatever horror film was on a Friday or Saturday night. Sometimes it's Hammer, Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter, which you could show to a child. And then sometimes it's like a Cronenberg season and you're like, what the hell is happening? There was no differentiation. And also when you were little as well, I don't think there's a quality differentiation. I could just wanted more. I just wanted to see it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, wherever it was, you're just happy, you're just grateful that it's there on that videotape. So that this kind of scenario ended up with me watching Friday the 13th with my gran. So, when I was about 10 years old, and I don't know which one of us was more confused, but it was amazing.
Oh man, that's so good. Cool. So yeah, so there is actually quite an analytical side to the book. I mean, it's worth saying there are lots and lots of spoilers for the films in there, but the way you approach looking at the films that you've chosen in such an analytical way, I think it is quite an insight into how your brain works. Because I think your average person who loves a horror film might not have sat down and go, I wonder why that was so good.
Yeah, I mean, this, you know, if there's a chance I've got into it too far, but it was trying to bring something different to the, you know, there's lots of horror books out there. And so this tries to analyze the ways in which horror films try to scare us and looks at the commonalities between those horror films. So on one hand, you could have something like Martyrs, which is incredibly, extremely violent, what have you. On another hand, you could have something really subtle, like The Innocents. And actually, there was a crossover in some of the ways, some of the techniques they used to scare us. So the book breaks that down into 7 scare tactics, that I call them, which are things that horror movies broadly do to try and achieve the goal of frightening us. And some of them, you know, so say one of the scare tactics is the grotesque. And some films are very grotesque and really strong SFX and blood and gore. Other things don't have that at all, but they might have uncanniness or another sort of gentler factor. And they're just, I think most of these 7 factors are there in most horror films. Just some are turned up and some are turned down, giving you a different experience.
Yeah, I think sort of reading through the scale, and you know, it helps you kind of look at things in a different way. I think things like the unstoppable, you know, I maybe not thought about it before, but that is such a big characteristic within horror films, is kind of the unstoppable force, the kind of inevitability that something really bad, or you know, that can overwhelm the sort of average human being is there, and it's unstoppable within the entire film.
Yeah, that's a harder one to pin down. That was the last of the scare tactics. And it's basically about the way that horror films tend to not provide closure. They tend to set something in motion. And rather, so whereas a thriller, you know, will end up with the baddie caught and it's all good, horror films tend to end up with a screaming heroine and a disappeared killer off into the distance, with the notion that you can't really kill whatever it is that's been started. And I think that is really scary, because you can come away from these things and your problems haven't been solved. You haven't achieved catharsis. Like, you're still left wandering home from that horror film, still terrified. You know, I mean, yeah, open-endedness is actually a huge part of the genre, which is why there's so many sequels. You know, even things that are brilliantly open-ended, like Halloween, that leaves you open for like sequel after sequel after sequel after sequel.
Forever,
But it's become a sort of I'm not going to say cliche, but it's become a kind of like expectation that the genre will not give you an easy answer.
Yeah, it's quite apt with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Obviously, the sequel's just been announced and the poster's been released today, and that, I think, was probably one of the ones that scared the most out of me as a kid. I think watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre, just the kind of visceral force of this guy just ripping through this group of teenagers who just had no idea what was coming, and it was so scary and so unusual as well. The sort of what was just a guy, kind of an unstoppable force, really.
Yeah, how old were you when you saw that film?
I want to say maybe 14.
Okay, I thought when you said kid, I was thinking, I mean, 14 is about right.
It's about right, yeah.
That's still a lot. It's a lot of movie for a young brain, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, definitely. What do you think? This is a good question then. So, what was the first 18 you saw growing up?
I think it probably wasn't a horror film. I seem to remember my dad getting into lots of trouble for letting us watch RoboCop.
Oh yeah,
about 7 or 8, and actually, you know, uncut, unmediated RoboCop is pretty violent.
Well, that first scene, you know, obviously how he's becoming RoboCop is got to be up there with one of the most kind of graphic scenes probably in horror or anything that came out at the time.
Yeah, and I think also there's lots of those things, you know, like you watch Commando or something and it's kind of a cartoon, but whereas the violence in RoboCop it's really nasty, like you say. So yeah, that probably was an error on my dad's part to show that to us, quite a small child. And here we are.
Yeah, I feel like everyone's got one of those stories though. I think mine was Predator. So similarly violent and similarly kind of sci-fi as well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Predator also, you know, there's all those skinned bodies, like until at the end, it is quite a
Pretty
serious
full on.
proposition, isn't it? Yeah, full on, definitely.
Brilliant. So it's worth